How's it going today, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having an awesome day so far. So I am back in Vitali's basement for another one of our, well, it's basically almost every year, our annual video series here in your basement. Last time we were here, we were talking about real estate trends, and pretty much we were in the height of the pandemic.
Right.
And so there was a lot of uncertainty in the real estate market. Now, fast forward about a year and a half or so, something like that, and we are in a completely different real estate market.
Yeah.
Did you ever expect this to be the outcome when we were looking at these factors about a year ago?
Honestly, I didn't. You know, the thing about it is when the thing started, when the pandemic started, we were all worried that the world's going to come crashing down. I'm going to lose all my, real estate investments. We were worried the tenants weren't going to pay because everyone was out of work. All that stuff that was going on with the eviction moratoria, which are still going on. You know, I've talked about that a little bit on my channel, but it's starting to wane. Things are starting to come back. And the biggest surprise, I think, is how much real estate has actually increased in value over the last year and a half versus going downward. So it's been a pretty big surprise, I think.
Yeah, 100%. So we're actually specifically today going to be talking about house hacking, not so much real estate trends, but it is good to just sort of have an idea of what market you're getting into, and I think a lot of people are still potentially waiting on the sidelines, or they're getting frustrated with this market. But I would say that a lot of people are looking to buy single family right now. That's the hot asset, is single family houses with everybody moving out of the cities. I don't know that there's as much, demand on multifamily. Well, have you found that there's an equal amount of demand? Or you have?
Yeah,
okay, it might just be because I haven't bought multifamily recently.
Right.
So
So you're not in it as much as I am, but just to give you guys a little bit of a background on me before we get into the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about today, I started investing in real estate in 2011. So I've been investing for the last 10 years, and I specifically started with a house hack. And for those who don't know what a house hack is, I think we should probably give a quick definition.
Sure.
It's basically buying a property in which you will live in part of that property, whether it be one bedroom, one apartment if it's a multifamily property, and renting the rest of that property out to a tenant who then offsets your housing expenses, which if you were living alone by yourself in a single family home would be 100% on you.
Sure.
Because you have a tenant helping you out and paying some of that cost for you, it's considered a hack. You're hacking your housing expense. And so with that, 11 or 10 years ago when I started with a duplex, a two-family house. It was a side-by-side. I basically moved in to one part of that, one of the apartments, rented out the other one, and essentially cut down my living expenses by 2/3. And since then, I continue to expand my real estate portfolio. I am now currently an owner, a part owner of almost 80 units.
Wow.
Yeah, and so, I kind of continued on that trend, and that the house hack, the very first building that I bought, was really instrumental in kind of propelling my investing journey and my journey to essentially financial independence now 10 years later. And so that's kind of what we want to talk, that's what I want to talk about with you guys today. And Ryan, and how I think house hacking is the best way to start. If you haven't purchased any real estate before, if this is your first attempt at it, I think house hacking is the best way to do it.
Yeah, guys, and I completely agree with that too, and that's how I also started my real estate investing experience or getting into it, and it was actually a conversation with Vitali one time where we grabbed a beer, and I was like, hey, when I was first deciding to get into real estate, I talked to a handful of people who were in the business themselves just to say, hey, what's the best way to get into this as a beginner? And everybody was saying house hacking. So that's how I got started. I bought my first property in 2019. I started out with the FHA loan. So I put very little down. I think I put 22 grand down on a property that was being sold at $459,000. So that's pretty crazy, is how much, if you do it right, how much leverage you can take on with so little money down.
Exactly.
Now, what I ended up doing is last summer, I refinanced that property after doing some upgrades to the cottage. I basically made it livable, rented it out to my brother as an in-law apartment, and between that and the market doing well, the value had gone up, so I refinanced. I put another $50K of my own money into the loan, and I was able to lower my mortgage by like $600 a month just by eliminating PMI and having less principal. So it's a really good stepping stone getting into house hacking. And then fast forward to today, I'm getting my first home equity line of credit, and I just got approved for $83,000 at 5% or 5.25% interest on that property. So I don't think people really fully understand all of the different ways that real estate can either make you money or basically give you access to cheap money.
Exactly.
Because obviously with a HELOC, I have to pay it back. It's not free money, but to be able to borrow that much money at such a low rate is really incredible.
One thing that people don't realize when they think about investing in real estate is you can actually get into these properties for much less than 20% or 25%, which would be the traditional amount that you are investing normally on a multifamily property where you're not going to be living in it. And it's just, I don't think people realize it, because everyone thinks that real estate is so expensive. Barrier to entry is very high because I need to save $60,000 or $100,000 before I can start investing in real estate. And so most people instead say, well, I only have $1,000, I only have $5,000 right now. I'm not even going to bother. I'm so far away from it. I'll just invest in cryptocurrency, or whatever other trendy investment is right now, and then they'll invest $1,000. Even if they make 20% on that, what are you making? $200?
It's not, because there's no leverage there.
Yeah.
You have such, because the thing with real estate for me that like really made me realize how much of an opportunity this was is that's really the only asset out there that has really what's in generally most cases safe leverage. Like in the stock market, leverage is just not a good idea. You don't want to double up and put $2 on every dollar and put that in the stock market, because historically, the prices fluctuate like crazy, and people get wiped out by doing that. But with real estate, it's more of a healthy way of being assigned this leverage. Like in my case, I had to put down $32,000, but they even said, hey, we do, you can do concessions and get $10,000 towards your closing and tack it onto the loan. Yeah, so I was like, at that point, I wanted to get as much of that borrowed money as possible. Right. So I said, yeah, why not? So I put down $22,000, and then I was in control of basically a $500,000 asset. Yeah. Name any other place where you can do that safely. You really can't.
Right. I mean, I 100% agree with that, and that's kind of why I've been in real estate for this long. I think there are some additional benefits with house hacking that are on top. Like you're actually getting that on top of the usual benefits of real estate investing. So the usual benefits, you get loan pay down by your tenants. So your tenants are paying down the mortgage, and you're essentially building equity in that property without using your own money for it. So that's number one, traditional benefit of investing in real estate. Number two is the tax treatment that you get, right? Which is, there's depreciation, which we won't get into it in too much detail here, obviously probably beyond the scope of this video, but that's a benefit of real estate. And then you also have rental income, assuming that you are, you bought a good property and it's actually cash flowing for you. That's another benefit. That's a third benefit that you get from real estate. But the additional benefits, and we alluded to it a little bit already, of house hacking are, number one, financing. So if you house hack a property, and if you buy a single family house too, if you use an FHA loan like Ryan did, your minimum down payment requirement is only 3.5% of the purchase price. And again, that's a huge deal when you are when you're looking for a property. You're looking at a property that is maybe $200,000, $300,000, or $400,000, because instead of having to put down 20%, you're only having to put down 25%. You're only having to put down 3.5%. And so that is a huge benefit of house hacking. But then there are some other less tangible benefits as well. If you're living in a property where you're also renting part of that property, your tenants are going to be on much better behavior because you as the owner are there. They know that you're there. They're not going to throw crazy parties. They're not going to trash your place because they know that you'll see that immediately, and that'll be a big issue for them. Whereas if you're across town, or if you're across the state, or you're across the country, and you don't have some eyes on the ground at that property, anything can happen. Tenants start loosening up and saying, oh, well, no one's paying attention. I can throw my trash over here. I don't have to, I don't have to keep up with the property as they otherwise would. So that's the second benefit that I find with house hacking, specifically with house hacking. The third benefit is that if you've never done it before and you're just a brand new landlord, brand new investor, it's much easier to learn how to become a landlord if you are in a house hack situation where you're living in the property versus if you were across town or across country.
Yep.
Because things like, if something breaks next door, and, let's say you have a daytime job, which most people who are thinking about house hacking probably have jobs
Sure.
and other needs to make an income. And so if something breaks, normally, you can come home and then you can do something, to fix it after work.
Yep.
It's not something where you have to leave work and
Go across town, then go home.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's much more convenient, and it's just easier to. It's like being a landlord with training wheels to start.
Yeah, I agree with that. It really is. Yeah,
so
it's great.
So those are additional benefits, and that's why I'm a huge proponent, and I really believe that house hacking is the best way to go for someone who's looking to just get started.
Yeah, 100%. And then I like to also mention what I'm sort of referring to as the final evolution of house hacking, as if it were a Pokemon, which is where I'm at now, which is where you're at, which is where you get to a point where you fully rent out the property, you take the cash flow to pay for I'm assuming that's what you're doing here, is the cash flow from your original house hack, and more of your properties are now what pays for your single family mortgage, which most would look at as more of a liability than as an asset. And then in my case, I ended up fully renting out my property, and that covers my apartment in New York. So it's kind of like, would I rather live, in the property or rent it out to somebody who's going to take care of it for me? Because I have a relationship with my contractor. He's worked on the property for years, fell in love with it, and was like, hey, I'd love to rent it. One of the hardest things for me was finding somebody who would really care for the property the way that I do.
Right.
But he really loves it, so we have a deal where he's going to rent it. I'm giving him a decent discount in exchange for basic maintenance on the property. And then between the positive cash flow and then the principal pay down, that number covers my rent.
Absolutely.
So that's like the ultimate goal for most people, is because you're probably not going to want to live in your house hack forever. I mean, how many did you do it for? A couple years, or what was your timeline like?
So my timeline was 5 years, and it wasn't by design. I wasn't thinking, okay, it's going to be 5 years or 3 years or any set number of years.
Sure.
It just kind of felt natural for me, to be there for 5 years and then move on to my single family home. But I didn't stop, obviously, investing when I bought my first duplex. And as I mentioned, I have quite a few rental properties now, and it can absolutely get more complicated and more involved, but you don't have to do that. I'm not saying that everybody needs to go out and buy 100 units and that's the path you got to take in life.
Like for me, example, I got into it. I have my basically 4 units, then I have the house in Florida. I don't want to get any more multifamily real estate. For me, I like what I have, but after I got into it, there is a little bit more. It's not passive income.
Right.
It is a little bit active, and I got my feet wet, like with the training wheels you were talking about, got a taste of it, and I said, okay, this works for this property, but I don't want to scale it up from here because it's just not what I want to be spending my time doing. But you have a more of a natural interest in it and a passion for it, where you're like, oh, well, this is my thing.
Right. Yeah, that's more of my business model, but as I'm gonna do a video on my YouTube channel about this specific topic, where if you take the average price of a home in the United States right now, and you look at average rents, and you also look at what the appreciation both for rents and for housing values has been, if you buy not single family, but at one multifamily property that you use as a house hack, and you move on, you buy a single family home, and you don't buy any other rental properties afterwards, as long as you hold it for 30 years, you're going to become a millionaire.
Wow.
Between appreciation, rents, the tax deductions, and everything else, over a period of 30 years, as long as you're managing it right, as long as you bought the right property, obviously you have to put in your work up front to figure out what that right property should be, and you bought it in a good area that will appreciate, there's no reason why you can't be a millionaire, so to speak, within a 30-year time frame. So, and that's not a tall order for most people. I think most average Americans can absolutely achieve that and get to that point. You're still not going to be a baller. You're not going to have Lambos that you're going to be driving, when you're 60, and most people don't want to think about it. Okay, well, I'm going to be a millionaire.
Sure.
In 30 years from now, that's not as exciting. That's fine. You can do other things. You could do what Ryan does. You can
it's
invest.
Not the only thing you're doing.
Right.
If one thing that is just sitting there on some land where once or twice a month you might have a phone call, that in and of itself, if that makes you $1 million, and then all the other stuff does stuff too, it's like,
why not? Yeah.
It's not the end all be all. Exactly. It can be, it can be your one thing where you go all in on that. But for me, real estate is just one little piece of my overall, portfolio.
Exactly.
Now, the last thing I want to touch on before we jump into deals, then I'll let Vitaly finish up as well with anything he wanted to, because we're going to show you guys live. We're going to research a couple of deals and sort of just give you our opinions on them. Is that aspect of you mentioned the patience of finding the right property. That can be the most frustrating part, because I literally spent a year and a half before I said, okay, there's the property I want, because I was looking for something so specific. And this is what I recommend doing. Before you go out there and start looking at properties, get a pencil and a piece of paper and write down your criteria. Do you want a garage? Are you looking for on-street or off-street parking? What are the factors you're looking for? Do you want a yard? Write down, this is what I want, and then when you find it, that's when you purchase. Because there were so many properties that I would go look at, and I would be like, yeah, this could work, but I don't like it. Like, I would never want to live here. And one of the things I always want to make sure that I do if I buy more properties, which I probably will, is to always buy something where I would want to live. And I think you follow the same rule of thumb as well.
Agreed.
So you have to be so patient, and you'll know when it's the right property. Like, I'm sure you've walked into a place, you get that feeling in your chest, you're like, this is the one. And you certainly know when it isn't. And you just go in there and you're like, yeah, I don't know, it could work, but I'm just not feeling it. So be patient with it, and, don't ever try to think that, okay, just because prices are going up, I got to FOMO into a property.
Agreed. Yeah, Ryan, that's exactly right. And one thing I kind of want to piggyback on what you just said is that you need to feel personally comfortable in the property, because it's a house hack, you're going to have to live in it, and that's a requirement of the financing.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
You have to be comfortable with it. And so the way I look at it is balancing your personal comfort with your financial goals. So it has to be a balance. Obviously, you don't want to buy a single-family house that you won't be able to rent out at all, versus also buying a house maybe that's a 4-unit that is in a terrible area where you maybe you don't want to live, you don't feel safe walking out the door. That's obviously not ideal either. Even if it brings you $4,000 a month in cash flow, that's not really where you want to be. So there's a balance and it's a scale that you have to kind of consider. I absolutely agree with you about writing down the criteria that you're interested in, and then based on what comfort level you have. So, for example, Ryan was a single-family guy when he bought his first house hack and multifamily property. So if that's your situation, you may be interested or willing to take a smaller apartment in the property and rent out the bigger units. And there'll be a property that we'll talk about that I picked out that we're going to discuss here that kind of has that potential to it. And get more cash flow from the other apartments because they're larger, they're going to get more rent. Versus if you have a family, you have a wife, 2 kids, and maybe your mother's living with you.
Right.
Well, in that situation, you can't do a single family where you have roommates or something like that because that's just not going to work. So you really need to figure out what makes more sense for your situation, and that will dictate what area you're going to buy in, what size of property you're going to buy in, whether it's a single family up to a 4-unit, which is the maximum you can get for financing purposes with FHA loans or other loans, owner-occupied loans. And also, what school district you're going to be in, what crime is like over there. Maybe if you're a bodybuilder or something, or you're a UFC fighter, you don't care if your neighborhood is a C+ or C class neighborhood where once in a while there's a mugging around the corner. Like maybe that's your thing, that's fine, But if you're a single mother, maybe that's not an ideal situation for you. So all those factors, they're intangible factors. They're not something that you can, figure out with a spreadsheet or look at the numbers and say, okay, this is a good deal or not. Those, I think, are the things that you need to consider first and foremost and know for yourself where you're going with that. And then you go into the analysis and you start looking at specific deals like we're about to do now.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, that was a great transition there. So now we're going to jump into the computer and we're going to look over a couple of deals and sort of show you guys what your research process might look like, and then different websites and resources that both Vitaly and I use when sourcing different deals. So let's jump right into the computer now. Alrighty guys, so now we are in the computer here. We're looking at a free website called Zillow, and we're going to have Vitaly show us basically how to get started when you're looking for a potential house hack.
Right, awesome. Yeah guys, so Zillow is not the most robust tool that you can have. Obviously, there are certain limitations with it. I'll talk about those. But to start, to kind of get your feet wet into how to search for properties, what you're looking for, we can definitely start here. I'll talk about a couple other tools, and also obviously we'll talk a little bit about real estate agents and the value that they might bring to you. But let's start with Zillow. So just what you're seeing here is the main page of Zillow, and you'll see there's buy, rent, sell, and some other tabs on top. As a buyer, you're looking for rental property, so you want to go ahead to the buy tab, and that will take you to this screen right here. And you will see at the very top, we have Clifton Park, New York selected. That's our local area, and you can change that by the location where you're looking for your property. As we already talked about, depending on what you're looking for, you should have some idea of location, right? If you're looking for single family properties that you want to house hack by room, might be one town in your area. If you're looking for multifamilies, it might be another one. Might take some time to maybe talk to some people. Maybe you know the area already yourself. But once you've picked an area, you can come here and you can type it in. And so right now, what it's showing us is basically all properties for sale right now with those red dots on the map that are, in this area in Clifton Park, New York. So what we want to do is we want to go to more, and we're going to refine our search criteria a little bit. So actually, let's start with price, because sure. I think that's an important component as well. You want to talk to your financial institution, bank, wherever you're going to get your financing from, to see what you're actually pre-qualified for, because you don't want to be looking for a $500,000 house when you can only afford a $200,000 one.
Not to mention too, at least for when I was purchasing my last two properties, I assume it's still the same, but a lot of places aren't even doing a showing without a pre-qual letter, because they're not even going to waste time showing you something, because there's so much demand for properties if you can't prove that you at least have a basically a conditional approval from a bank. So that's one of the first things, is getting a hold of a mortgage company. And in this area, I like Homestead if you're in upstate New York, but there's tons of them all over the country. That's who I've used. Do you have another that you might like if there's someone in this area?
Yeah, so I have a general recommendation for people. I think that it's best to go to more local banks versus national banks, because they will be more flexible potentially with you, and you might be able to get some more personalized service that way. I like credit unions, so in my area, we have a very close relationship with the local credit unions. We've done many deals with them. Obviously, we're into commercial now and expanded, but even for house hacking purposes, for owner-occupied purposes, I like credit unions. I also like local banks, which sometimes they call them portfolio lenders, which is they keep their loans on their books as opposed to selling to someone else. So those types of lenders might actually have some more flexibility than someone like Bank of America might, where they're rigid and they're basically Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, limited. So with that in mind, let's say our search criteria is $200,000 is the maximum that we can afford, that we want to spend. So I'll put that as the maximum here, and that should reduce our numbers substantially here. So right now we have a map view, and I can zoom in a little bit more on the area that we want to look for. Let's go and look in a more limited area. Let's try Colony, New York, which is a pretty small town in our area, and you can see that significantly reduced your options.
And that market is and we might not find something in that area too, just because at least in upstate New York, what I have found is that a lot of the counties that have higher property taxes have lower property values, but then those that have lower taxes have higher values. So that's something else you really have to consider when looking at any property. Because I had situations where I was looking at duplexes that were $150,000, and I was like, this looks like I'm going to slam it out of the park, until I find out $9,000 a year in taxes.
Taxes, yeah. There are many nuances to this, of course, taxes being one of them. The other is obviously Colony, New York has a very good school district.
Sure.
Good school districts garner more expensive prices, and it's just the nature of the beast. And so a duplex, the same identical duplex in a not so nice school district, might go for $100,000 less than the one in Colony.
Sure.
So like right now I have $200,000 as our selected option. If I go to home type, right, And you can see all of these are checked right now. So you've got houses, townhomes, multifamily, condos, lots, apartments, all that stuff. We don't need all of that, right? Let's say we're looking for small multifamily properties. So we want to uncheck all these other options except for multifamily and see what's left. And there may not be anything left. And if there isn't anything left, there's one left in here.
It looks like it might be sort of because what you run into as well is in-laws where they're trying to mislabel it. So that we'll see if it's a legal two-family, but oftentimes you'll find people trying to sell you a house with a in-law or a non-permitted, addition under the guise of multifamily. So you always want to make sure that you know what you're looking at here.
Right. So here's the house, right? So we've got the photos. They're identifying it as a duplex, and they're saying it's a duplex in a family-friendly neighborhood here. So let's see what information is available. Now, this is where the limitations with Zillow are going to come in. It used to be that Zillow would tell us what the rent is. And I looked last night trying to find it. Now, I mostly use MLS because I'm an agent. I'm an owner of the real estate brokerage. But I'm just wondering, okay, what do regular people have to do to get the rent information? So if you scroll through here, you can expand the fields and it'll give you, information about bedrooms, appliances, all the different features of the property. But even though it's a rental property, they're not telling you what the rent is, which is obviously an issue. And the reason for that mainly is because they want you to contact one of their agents and get that information from them.
They're just trying to basically use this as a lead gen tool. They do show price and tax history, which can be helpful. And then the Zestimate, do you find that to be useful at all, or is that sort of arbitrary?
Yeah, I think Zestimates have gotten better.
Yeah.
I think Zillow has been improving their algorithms as they go. But I find them to be more accurate with single-family homes versus multifamily.
I would agree, yeah.
And the same thing goes for estimated rent. So they actually have estimated monthly costs. I think they're going to have an estimated monthly rent. So rent's estimate, $1,539 per month.
So they're figuring what, $750 per unit?
They're going by bedrooms.
They're going by bedrooms.
They're going by bedrooms here. So this, I don't even think that this is accurate numbers here. What we need to do is we actually need to get at the bottom line numbers that are listed by the agent, in this case, by the broker. So the way I've been able to do that without actually going to an agent and getting on the MLS is there's a site called estately.com, and I'm going to try to find this property with this address on that site and see if we can glean the rent information on that site. All right, guys, so we found this property on eStately. It's the same property, 52 Tennessee Avenue. And this is really the only site that I found that actually gives you rent information right now, because again, all of them are trying to capture leads and funnel them to agents, but this one actually does. So it has all the same information as Zillow does. We got the total taxes, general taxes, other information on here, square footage of this house, and then we have this a little bit mislabeled, but if you guys can see where it says living rooms on first floor, right next to it says 950 living rooms. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's not 950.
That'd be a heck of a deal.
It would be a pretty large property for sure. But what that actually is, even though it's mislabeled, and I think it's the formatting on their site, is that's the price of the rent for that one unit. So $950 for one unit, and then the next one you can see it says living rooms and basement, $1,100. That is also referring to the price for the other unit. So right now we're looking at basically a little over $2,000, $2,500 in rental income.
Or $2,050, right?
Sorry, $2,050 of rental income for this property. And so that's helpful information for us to know now that we know what the asking price is. So we should
take a look at the pictures too.
Yeah.
I would want you to let me know as you go through there if you see anything that's like, this looks good, or oh, that's a red flag too. Because I think a lot of people are going to go through photos too, and if you don't know anything about real estate, you might be like, what the heck am I looking for?
Sure. Yeah, and before you start jumping into kind of the analysis and calculations, you obviously want to look at the pictures to make sure that the property is something that you're interested in, that there aren't any obvious issues with it. As I'm looking at it, it doesn't look like a traditional multifamily property. As Ryan mentioned in the beginning, it kind of looks like an in-law. Maybe there was an addition. Maybe they chopped up the house. So that's not ideal to me as just as an investor, as someone who's potentially looking for a house hack.
Not to mention, I don't like the driveway situation there, because if you have two tenants, I don't know that there's enough space on that right side for another car. So you're going to have two people jockeying in and out. Also, just, you don't want to go crazy and start saying, oh, look at all the risks that could happen. Right. But my thought process is you've got this carport with these pillars. All it takes is for one person to back into that, and I don't even know how much that could cost you to fix something like that,
Agreed. Yeah, and those are sort of intangible things that you should be paying attention to. Parking situation, are you going to be comfortable? Will you tell the tenant, hey, you have to park on the street? Is that something that's going to be an issue? So that's one thing that you definitely look at. The other thing is just the layout of the property. Sometimes it's hard to tell what it looks like in pictures. In this case, I can tell you that it was probably most likely originally a single-family home that got chopped up. So it was never intended to be a multifamily. It's not an ideal side-by-side duplex that I kind of like to look for.
And you have to be careful with that, too, because if they didn't rewire it, you might be responsible for the utility payment, and that could be just a totally unforeseen cost. I mean, you can probably get a nominal rate that you're charging your tenants for utilities, but obviously if they're paying you a flat rate, they could be cranking up the AC in the summer and cranking the heat in the winter, and it could cost you a fortune in utilities.
Agreed. And the listing usually will tell you whether the tenants pay their own utilities or not, and we can actually let's see if it says that here. We get that information. It doesn't look like it says. I think if we had obviously the full MLS listing, we would probably get that information on there. Again, one of the limitations of working with publicly available sites. But here's one thing that jumped out at me looking through the pictures, right? In this picture, you can see there's a baseboard heater along the way, and it looks to me like it is a boiler. So it's not an electric baseboard heater. It looks like it's a hot water baseboard heater, which means that there's a boiler. Chances are, to me, this tells me that there's likely one boiler. And that's heating both units.
So that'd be on the landlord.
It would be on the landlord. So you would have to factor the cost of heating into your rent price. And obviously that $2,050 rent that we just estimated for the two apartments combined would have to be discounted in some way in your mind in terms of what are your costs versus your income and where will your cash flow end up being. So let's see what else we can see in the pictures. So it looks like they are, again, the house is old. It's got it's a little chopped up. It's not an open concept or anything like that. You have a doorway separating, looks like maybe the kitchen area, and I don't know if this is a living room or a dining area, but that is something that you see there.
So this here looks like, too, there's some type of exposed plumbing. That's just, that's something, it's not the end of the world, but when I'm looking at my criteria, which means, hey, I want to buy something where I'd want to live, personally, I don't know that I'd want to be looking at exposed plumbing outside of the wall,
Yeah, and it's just, it looks like an old house.
Yeah.
It looks like an older house. It looks like it's probably going to have just some issues just based on age.
Yeah.
The components have aged. The kitchen isn't particularly nice. Like all these little things that may turn you right off if you're looking at pictures, and maybe you don't even want to get into any of the analysis on the deal like this if these pictures don't work. So this looks like an attic space. I think that is probably the second apartment here. Or at the very least, some of the bedrooms and a bathroom looks like are upstairs.
Wow, that's quite the bathroom.
Yeah. And so here's the second kitchen.
So this is probably the lesser of the nice the apartments in terms of which one was renting for the smaller amount of money.
Right. Flooring looks like hardwood floors, original, which could be a good thing. Overall, I think the pictures on this property suggest to me that it's not likely that the agent's estimates for rent are actually going to pan out.
Yeah.
It could be. I could be wrong. There could be a lot more to it, but just generally looking at it, the tiny kitchen, the cramped apartments, cramped rooms, I think that it's probably a lot less than the numbers that we're seing on the listing. So what I would say in this case, and I want to go to a property that I kind of pre-vetted before we met today, that we can go through some of the numbers on it.
Just on first-hand impressions, though, would you say this is a property you would just pass on, or is it something you'd go look at just because it might be beneficial?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd probably pass on this.
I would too, yeah.
Just by the looks of it. And that's personal comfort level, plus I don't know if you can get the rents that you want. The price is great.
Yeah.
So the price is $185,000 for a property that's going to return gross rent assuming that the numbers were correct, we're questioning that.
Sure.
But assuming that $2,050 was the actual rent, if it was fully rented, that would be an over 1% rule. So basically, the 1% rule is that your monthly rent is at least 1% of the purchase price. That is a kind of a general rule that a lot of investors look at.
Sure.
Some investors like to look at the 2% rule, but for house hacking specifically, you can reduce that requirement to maybe something like 1%. Because the goal here is not necessarily to make huge cash flow, is more to offset your living expenses and live somewhere comfortably. So with that said, the numbers on paper don't look too bad, but with the pictures and kind of what it is, the house and everything else, I'm not particularly overly interested in this particular deal.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've lived in a variety of different places. I've spent a while living in a house, even older than this. It was a 1920s. Now, the house that I was living in, my house hack, was a 1840s farmhouse. Difference being, it was a gut rehab in 1999, so they redid everything. This is eventually going to need a gut rehab at some point. And I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, with a property like this, you're going to get mice in the walls. You're going to get leaking pipes, random stuff like that. It's not going to be a passive property. Like, just think about it. Every aspect of that property is, well, it's a 1940, so a lot of it's 80-year-old metal, 80-year-old electrical, hopefully not, but all of those things that haven't been updated are 80 years old, you know?
Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. So you got to look at all those things, and as you're going, kind of weed out the ones that you don't want to see, and then ones you kind of look at and you say, okay, well, this might work. The pictures look good. Then you look at the numbers, and we can get into those numbers a little bit more about what exactly you're looking for and how you estimate them. And then if they make sense, then maybe you give the agent a call or give the owner a call if it's a for sale by owner, and go see it in person, and then continue your analysis.
Yeah, so for now, guys, basically, just upon our opinion, we're going to say we're going to pass on this, but Vitaly just does have two deals that he looked over that look a little bit better, and then so we're going to show you those now, and then assuming that you like it, which those ones are going to be better, what the next steps might be thereafter. So for this one, it'd be a pass, but let's take a look at a couple more now on the MLS resource.
Yeah. So guys, I'm going to switch over. I have a couple of listings that I pulled up. What you're seeing on your screen is what an agent might send you if you're working with an agent. And that has a lot more detail, has a lot more information. We'll go through some of it. But just on the agent piece, I just kind of want to maybe throw out this thought for people. If you're a buyer, in most states, the rule is that the buyer does not pay the agent who's representing the buyer directly. The way that the buyer's agent gets paid in most cases is from the seller, who pays both commissions, both seller's agent commission and the buyer's agent commission. And the buyer's agent doesn't get paid at all unless they find you a deal that you end up closing on. So they work for you for free. And if you sign a contract, sign an agreement with an agent to represent you, they can basically work at your behest, and you can ask them to send you properties, send you listings as they come on. They'll create a drip. Basically, if a new property comes on the market, they will capture that. It'll go directly to your email. You can then vet it and say to the agent, hey, I want to go look at this, or no, I'm not interested in this, and modify the criteria. So it makes it a lot easier to work with someone like that. It makes the searching process easier. Now, with that said, I'm not saying that you should relegate the analysis to your agent. In fact, most agents are not good investors. They don't really know the investment side of real estate,
right?
As well as you, if you end up studying this topic and watch videos like we're doing right now, and other videos and other resources that we'll mention. But you should be doing that analysis anyway. Even if your agent is telling you that this is a good deal, you should go for it. Do that analysis on your own as well, and then compare it to what the agent's telling you.
Also, the thing I was going to say, which is a piggyback off of that, is your average real estate agent is working in single-family homes. So they're typically, when someone comes in, their biggest priority is, what's that countertop made of? Is that granite?
Right. Yeah.
You know, you're going into it with a totally different perspective of, hey, what's the cash flow going to be like on this? They're not going to be used to those types of questions, and I know that from just firsthand experience, and you've seen that too. So
absolutely,
you can't rely on them to tell you everything. I mean, they'll be able to tell you things about, hey, does this look like lead paint? Or, oh, is this insulation really old?
Yep.
They should be able to give you a general answer.
Yep.
Your inspector is going to give you more of that answer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're looking for someone to give you more of an investor perspective, you really got to try to find an agent who's also an investor himself or herself. And that's sort of shameless plug. My brokerage, Serenity Real Estate team in the capital region, we're only local, so it would only apply to those of you watching if you're local to us. But we have over 20 agents that are on our team. I would say 90% of them are investors themselves. They either have their own rental properties, or they're doing flipping, or they're doing things that are in the investor space. So they would be a little bit more knowledgeable than your average investor or your average agent would be. But again, you got to do your own analysis no matter what. And so let's talk about that in this case now. So what you're seeing on the screen, I have the first property that I wanted to mention. And what I'm doing here is I'm basically showing you a property that is one property that maybe is not in the best of neighborhoods, not in the best school district, but will probably cash flow better for you. And then the next one I'll show you is one that super comfortable, very easy, very nice school district, probably not going to have too many headaches, maybe a little bit newer as well, but your cash flow is not really going to be there. It's more of an appreciation play with the second one. So this one, more of a cash play. So let's look at it, right? So the address here is 114 15th Street in Waterville, New York. The asking price is now at $229,900. So they dropped the asking price from $239,900 down to $229,000. And what we see here, just so you guys direct your attention to it, you can see the rents are listed here, and it's $700 for the first unit, $700 for the second unit, and $1,100 for the third unit. And these are monthly rents. And to the left of that, you can also see the size of these units. So the one that's $1,100 per month is a three bedroom, one bath. Okay, the ones that are $700 each are a one bedroom, one bath each. We have 3 stoves that are included, 3 refrigerators that are included with this property, and the property was built quite a while ago. So it was built in 1880, so it's not a newer property either. However, this is important. I want to show you guys, if you go to the pictures in this one and you blow them up, you make them a little bit bigger on your screen, you can actually see that if we look at more of the exterior pictures here, once I scroll through them, that this is actually a brick building.
Yeah, brick is good.
It's much more solid, especially in the Northeast, where you have pretty crazy weather. We get snowstorms, rainstorms, all kinds of crazy weather. It's nice not to have siding that you have to worry about. As long as the brick is in good shape, it doesn't need to be repointed. In these pictures, this looks like a very, very solid building. It looks like it's been well taken care of on the outside. I'm comfortable with that. I like seeing that on a building, and that is something that allows me to now go to the next level and think, okay, well, it looks like they took care of it on the outside. It's got a nice curb appeal. It's nicely painted. Let's look at the inside. Now, the inside pictures aren't exactly great, and I think this goes to more who the agent is on this deal. And I'm not calling anybody out,
Sure.
But agents sometimes are not the best photographers. And in my brokerage, we always have professional photos taken because that's kind of how we operate. That's not every agent. That's not every broker. Sometimes they'll go in on a cell phone. It looks like this is like iPhone 4. It's not even, it's not even
Yeah.
iPhone 12 or anything like that with a smudge on the lens. That's kind of what these pictures show. But sometimes it's actually a good thing because that can actually be a diamond in the rough.
Yeah.
Someone else looking at these pictures might say, you know what? I don't like the way the pictures look, and I'm going to skip. But if you actually consider what it is, maybe it is something that is worth looking into. So the photos aren't that great in this particular example, but I think that it could have some potential. Again, I'm not saying this is the greatest deal ever, but let's look at the numbers. So you're going to house hack this building. That means that you're going to live in one of these apartments. So you're not going to be able to count the rent from all 3 apartments. You're going to have to figure out, okay, which of these apartments am I going to occupy and which one will I need to nix from your rent roll. And if in a situation like a single guy, doesn't have a family, a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment may be perfect. Especially if you're young, you just started working, maybe you were living in a college situation before this where you have roommates, you're used to still living that college lifestyle, and you're not necessarily looking for your first forever home.
Right.
You're kind of looking for something where you can be frugal, your mindset is on financial independence down the line. This may be a good opportunity for you to take a $700 per month apartment and then get $1,800 in rent going forward from the other 2 apartments. So with that said, let's say that the purchase price that you offer for this property is $220,000, and let's say the seller accepts. And your plan is to live in one of the $700 apartments, and so your monthly rent that you will receive is $1,800. So let's think about what the mortgage expense will be, because the next thing is to figure out what our expenses are, right? So right now I'm talking about what our cap is for rents. We think that's about $1,800 per month. What will this cost you to own it, and where will you be at the end of the day with your expenses and cash flow? I like to use a site called bankrate.com for mortgage amortization calculators, so we can go ahead and do that. So again, we're assuming that the purchase price is $220,000 on this property, right? That's what you offered, the seller accepted. So now we got to figure out what the mortgage is going to be. So if this hypothetical buyer is using an FHA mortgage, that means that their down payment minimum has to be at least 3.5%. So that's 96.5% of the $220,000 purchase price that this person is going to be financing. So I'm just going to figure out what that number is, so then we can go ahead and plug it into the Bankrate mortgage calculator. So we got $220,000. I'm going to multiply that by 0.965, and our mortgage amount comes to $212,300. So let's go ahead and plug that into here. And I'm just going to leave the interest rate at 4.5%. That sounds about right for what the market is right now. So we've got 30-year mortgage term, 4.5%, $212,300, and we're going to go ahead and click calculate. And so our monthly mortgage expense, this is principal and interest, is going to be $1,075.69. All right, so I'm just going to jot down our numbers as we go. So we've got $1,800 monthly rent, right? That's our income that we're working with. Now, let's look at the expense side of the equation for this particular property. So we just figured out that $1,075.69 is our monthly mortgage. Now, because it's an FHA loan, we're also going to have some PMI, which is mortgage insurance that you have to pay monthly on a property. Now, we can actually go ahead and figure this out, or we can just throw it out an estimate. I think for a property at this price point, you're probably looking at somewhere around
maybe,
just under 200, I would say. So let's call it, I'm going to say 180. 180 PMI, interest and principal. The next thing that our listing will tell us, which will be the taxes on this property. So if I go back to the listing information, annual taxes are $4,529. So we're going to add that in there as well. And we're going to have to divide that by 12 to get to the monthly amount, because that's how we're factoring these calculations. So let's do that. Okay, so that gives us about $377 per month that would go toward taxes. Now, what other expenses should we be looking at or thinking about? Well, the very next one that comes to mind would be, of course, insurance. Property insurance is something definitely I recommend. A lot of mortgage lenders, most that would be doing an FHA loan, are going to require it. So you're going to need to shop around and figure out what that might be. For the lenders that I kind of deal with, and for these types of properties, and the 3-unit property with a $220,000 purchase price, my estimate for this property on insurance is probably going to be around $100 per month. It might be a little bit less. We've gotten some better deals on some of these, but I'm just going to estimate that. Now, that is obviously something that comes with experience. If you don't know, if this is your first time doing any of this, you are going to want to talk to an insurance broker. You can even call your insurance company that provides insurance for your car and ask them to give you an estimate on it. And it's not something that's really hard to do, but I think we can estimate $100 for insurance. Now, if you're going to be living in the property and you're at all handy, you obviously will be able to save some money on your maintenance and repair expenses. But maintenance and repair expense is definitely a real expense. It's not exactly a fixed expense because it is something that occurs episodically. It's not always going to be there, but you might one day have a pretty big expense, and then for a couple of months you might not have anything. So the way that real estate investors handle that estimate is we usually calculate a percentage of the rental amount that you're getting as what your expense is actually going to be. So typically, depending on the age of the house and the condition of the house, it's anywhere between 5% and even 15% sometimes. That's how I do it. In this case, looking at the house, it's not a newer house, but it's also been pretty well kept up. Maybe you estimate the maintenance at, let's say, 10% to make it easy. And in this case, you're getting $180 per month in rent, so it's going to be another
$1,800 a month in rent, so that would be $180, right? For the
$180 per month, yeah,
Gotcha.
for repairs and maintenance, and that's assuming a 10% estimate. Again, this could vary depending on the situation, but we're just trying to ballpark and see where these numbers come out at the end of the day and whether or not it makes sense as an investment. The other thing, depending on your area, you might have a garbage expense, you might have a water and sewer expense. That all depends on your municipalities. This is something you want to call your municipality and figure out, in this area, do they charge for this, or is that included in taxes? And that's kind of one of those things. Some of the other expenses may be a little bit less typical for multifamily properties, like HOA expenses or some other special assessment or something like that along those lines.
Now, the one I would say, and I'm sure you're going to get to it as well, a lot of people, younger people, have no interest in mowing lawns or plowing driveways. So you got to think about that too. Of, are you going to buy a snowblower and then buy a mower and do your own groundskeeping, or are you going to hire a plow company? Because in our area, you're looking at probably $50 a push, or if it's contracted, maybe $200 a month during the winter would be probably on the high end.
Right.
But do you want to estimate something for landscaping?
So normally I would put that in the maintenance part.
So you already have that factored into your calculation?
Yes, it depends. So in this case, I don't believe there is a driveway to take care of, but there is a lawn.
Okay.
And what I was saying along the lines of, okay, this is going to be a single person renting a single one-bedroom apartment, chances are they're going to be willing to do some of those things.
Sure.
But if you're not, obviously you want to factor that in, and maybe you want to bump up the maintenance and repairs estimate that I just put out there to something a little bit more substantial. So in addition to these expenses, there's also a vacancy expense. And a lot of people don't think about it, and it's not a tangible expense, not a fixed expense, but it is something that's going to occur. And a vacancy is basically when you have either a physical vacancy where a tenant has moved out and you haven't put a new tenant in yet, and that might happen between tenants because you're having to turn over the apartment, or maybe the market turn and you can't find somebody, but you might have a month or 2 months where there is no tenant. So instead of getting rent from 2 apartments where you're living in the building in the third one, you might only be getting rent for one of them for one of the months or 2 of the months. So as a shorthand, again, we like to estimate at least 5%. 5% is pretty much the average for vacancy expense when you're doing your calculations. So I would put 5%, so in this case, that comes in $90 per month as your vacancy expense. And the last and final expense that I will mention is called the capital improvements expense, or capital reserves. Capital expenditures, they're all synonymous terms. And that is basically referring to things like replacing large items in the property. So if a roof goes, you got to replace the roof. If a furnace goes, you got to replace the furnace. They're not repairs, right? So if a roof, a few shingles got broken off, that would still fall under the repairs. If it was something that a part needed to be replaced in a furnace, that's a repair. That's not a capital improvement or capital expense. Capital expense is kind of like a major replacement of a component of a building that cannot be repaired. And a lot of people do not estimate for this, and that gets a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because as you know, you've owned your property for a while now, if something like that breaks, that's a huge expense for you. Like, a furnace could cost you $3,000.
I could tell you about every cost because I had to replace just about everything. I had a furnace, air conditioner, water heater. So, I mean, the roof was new, so I'm good on the roof, but I had to buy a roof for the Florida property, so I'm well aware of those costs.
So the way you factor that into your calculations is you don't know when that exact repair or the exact cost is going to occur. So you got to factor it in monthly. And the way we do it again is by doing an estimation of what that will cost you over time. So let's say it's 10%. I mean, 10% is a reasonable one. You could go higher, you could go lower if it's a newer property. In this case, I would say 10%. So I would put another $180 for that. And so let's add up these costs and see where that gets us. Now, keep in mind that, again, you're living in one of the apartments, so you're getting to live somewhere for free. I think these expenses are going to exceed the income that you're getting, but it's going to be pretty damn close, and it's still going to be potentially a net positive for you in the sense that you're still saving by living in this property and getting all the benefits.
Not to mention, something that a lot of people I think are unaware of is every mortgage payment you make, you're putting some money into that piggy bank because of the principal pay down. So even if this is not necessarily cash flow positive, or even if it's costing you some amount of money, some people add back the principal pay down because it's technically money going in your pocket.
Exactly. All right, so after adding up all of these amounts, what I am coming up with, and Ryan can double check me because he's better at math than me, is $2,182.69 is your total monthly expense for owning and running this property. So that's where you are right now. So that means right now, if you did buy this property and you live in the $700 apartment, you're going to end up spending about $382 per month in order to own and live in that property. Now, as we mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily have to live in this property forever. The idea would be that you live in this property for a few years, and then maybe you end up buying a single family home, or maybe even another house hack. Maybe you upgrade to a different house hack and you move out of this property and you end up renting the apartment in which you were living. So if we do that, if we add the other apartment back into the equation, which was $700,
Sure.
right? So it's $1,800 plus $700, we end up with $2,500 per month in your gross rent. Then at this point, you can see that there's actually a positive difference in our numbers here. And so once you subtract the total monthly expenses from the total gross income after you moved out, you'll see that you're somewhere around $318, $317 in the plus monthly going forward. And again, that's in addition to the mortgage pay down, appreciation that the property may receive, as well as tax benefits that it receives.
Sure.
So all in all, just by the numbers, and I'm not saying go buy this property, I'm not saying this is the property to go and and start putting offers on, but this may be a decent house hack for someone who's willing to make some of these sacrifices and take a smaller apartment, maybe do some of the maintenance themselves and so forth, and work toward their financial independence in their future.
Also, not to mention, you could also deploy the strategy I did here, which would be you get your foot in the door with the FHA loan, and then you invest a little bit of money in the property. Like for this one, for example, on the front of it where it has that white siding, I would have that redone to something that has more curb appeal. I like the blue paint, but let's say maybe you do, windows or make some improvements over the years. Let's say you own it for 2-3 years. You're slowly paying down that mortgage, lowering the amount that you owe, and then you can do a refinance where you basically switch to 20% down, get rid of the PMI. At that point, you could probably get your total expenses on the property down to like $1,700 a month, somewhere around there. Sure. Maybe. Sure. So then you're looking at, if you rented the whole thing, yep. Now you're talking $800, $700-800 yep. a month of cash flow there.
Yeah, and the next dimension to all of this too is, are there opportunities for increasing the rents with certain improvements or certain things that you could do to the property? It may not be the case with this specific property, but what you should be looking for once you get more seasoned in this and you actually start to spend some time with the numbers, you get more comfortable with them, maybe you go see some properties without putting offers on, is maybe you start noticing things that could become value add opportunities. So for example, some properties you'll find may have a room that is not being used as a bedroom, but could very easily become a bedroom if you maybe added a door into that room or you added a closet into that room. So instead of renting that apartment as a 1-bedroom, perhaps you can rent it as a 2-bedroom. And just doing that alone could possibly increase your rental income by $100 or $200 per month more. And so those are kind of more advanced techniques and ideas, but it's definitely something that you could accomplish if you studied this and you actually put your mind to it and you started looking at some of these properties. All right, so let's quickly now look at the other property. This is the one that I mentioned that is kind of a nicer neighborhood, but the cash flow is probably not going to be there as much. It's going to cost you more as well. So let's look at this one just to show you guys some pictures real quick. It's got 2 garages, so it's in a better school district, good school district. It's not a home run out of the park, but you could see it's a little bit newer. It's got some nicer finishes to it, more space. It just looks more like a property that maybe you want to live in and you'd be more comfortable in. So now let's quick look at the numbers here. So what they're saying for this particular property is that one is being rented for $925 per month, and the other unit is being rented for $1,500 per month. This is a 2-unit property. Now again, the vacant apartment is an estimate. Take that with a grain of salt. Maybe you can get that for it, maybe you can't. It's 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom in this apartment. So let's just assume that that is the case, that you could get that much. So we're going to do the same type of analysis. So it was $925 plus $1,500, which comes to $2,425. Am I right?
900 plus, sorry, what was it again?
1,500 plus 925.
25. It would be 25, I believe. No, 24. You're right. Okay. Maybe
right.
I'm not better at math.
Maybe, yeah, all right.
Gave me too much credit.
That's all right. So monthly rent, right, for property. All right, now let's look at the expenses on that property. All right, guys, so I got all the numbers up here just so that we can go through them real quick. So just to recap again, $2,425 monthly rent for property number 2 is what the max would come to, assuming the agent's numbers on the listing are correct. And then principal and interest on this, again, we're assuming a 3.5% down payment FHA loan. It comes to $1,466.85. PMI, I bumped it up a little bit because the purchase price is around $300,000 in this case for us, so it's a little bit more than the $180 on the other property, so that factors in a little bit more. Taxes are a little bit more, $416.66 per month. Insurance is a little bit more. Again, it's a nicer house, bigger house, kind of in a nicer area and more expensive as well, so that's going to be more. And then the percentage accounted for expenses, which is 10% for repairs and maintenance. I'm doing 10% of the total monthly rent, even though theoretically you're only getting $925 or $1,500, depending on which apartment you end up living in. But I think in this case, it's maybe more accurate to say that we use the total potential rent to do our estimate. And then vacancy expense, same idea, 5%, comes to $120 roughly, and then $240 for the capital expenditures for the reserves. All that together added up, grand total, $2,823.51. So again, if you are picking, let's say you decide you're going to live in the $925 apartment, that is what you're taking off your monthly rent roll, you're left with $1,500. And as compared to the previous example, your overage was $382 to maintain that property and operate it. In this case, it's going to be over $1,300.
Sure.
So it's a huge difference right off the rip, and you're paying that because you wanted to live in more comfort. It's a nicer area. Whatever the case might be, that's kind of what you're paying for there. Appreciation is likely to also be higher in this specific case if you hold on to the property long enough. So there's a benefit that would offset that. But I also want to point out what happens after you move out and whether or not this property is going to be a good property for you when you move out. In this case, the maximum, let's assume the numbers are right again, $2,425 in maximum rent, and our estimated expenses are $2,823. And that is $400 some odd dollar difference almost with the property fully rented. So once you move out, this really is not going to be a profitable rental property for you. So even though it's a nicer building, I'd be more hesitant to buy a deal like this than I would be to buy something else, unless you're going to live in this for a really long time and then just sell it when you move out.
Yeah. Or if you planned on doing a remodel yourself and then a refi on it, then you can get the numbers. Because, I mean, this to me reminds me more of like my house hack, because I spent a lot of money on my first house hack. I mean, I was looking at some properties that were $200,000. Yeah. Obviously, getting into a $459,000 property. Yeah. And I think even when you and I talked about it, you had said to me, we sat down, went through the numbers like this more or less, and you were like, yeah, it's not going to pay you money, but you're going to get to live. I mean, my property is unique too because it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom house attached to two other apartments. Exactly. So he was like, it's not going to put money in your pocket, but you are going to be able to live in a 2-bed, 2-bath for like $1,200 a month or something, and some of that's going in your pocket. So if you want to live for free, you can achieve that with house hacking. Yep. But the truth is, you're going to live in a property that looks more like the first example. Yep. Right. But if you compare paying $1,300 of money towards an asset that you own versus paying that in rent to somebody else, you're still better off in most cases paying that to yourself.
100%. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so if we're comparing it, renting versus house hacking, no question. Or even living in a single-family house versus house hacking, even in a deal 100%. Like this, it's still a win for you overall. The other dimension to this, and it's probably like our last point that we'll mention at this point, but if there are other things and factors that go along with the deal, like Ryan's deal, I actually liked his deal a lot because you were able to improve. Now you can possibly use that property for Airbnb. Like there's
so mine had, I don't know if I mentioned that to you guys. I might have earlier, but one of my favorite things I like is buying property with different optionality to it.
Yeah.
So I liked this property because the main structure had a house, 2 apartments, but then there was basically an unfinished cottage on the property and a barn with a loft.
Exactly.
So when I looked at that, I said, okay, we're looking at only this structure, but if I have the money, I can remodel that cottage and then I can get my brother in there under the in-law restrictions. So for me, I was able to see the potential, and I had, $60,000 to put into the property. We rehabbed, I didn't do it myself, but my contractor who lives there now in the main house rehabbed the entire cottage. My brother moved in. It gives him an awesome place to live, and I charge him a family rate for rent. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, but it's extra money that the property literally did not have. I was able to go in, make modifications, and then pull new money out of the property. And if I wanted, I could rent out the barn for storage, but I personally would rather have it as storage for myself. But I love looking at properties with more optionality for making money. Yeah. And so that's exactly what you're getting at there too.
And that's value added. That's exactly the next level that you can go to with house hacking, as well as other multifamily properties, as well as just generally real estate. If you can add value to it through something you do to the property, that increases the property's potential exponentially.
100%, yeah. So guys, if you want to check out Vitaly's channel, that's going to be Succeed REI on YouTube. I'm also going to put a card up in the corner so you can check it out. If you enjoyed this video here and you made it to the very end, make sure you drop a like for that almighty YouTube algorithm. And also, if you find this video to be helpful, it'd be awesome if you share it with a friend who might be looking to get into house hacking as well. So thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Subscribe and hit that bell for notifications if you haven't already. Thanks so much for doing the video, Vitaly.
Appreciate it.
And maybe in another year and a half, we'll continue our almost annual video series here from your basement.
Sounds good, man.
It's been a good time. I'm also going to be doing a Q&A video on Vitaly's channel where he's going to be hitting me with 10 questions. So make sure you guys...
Personal finance.
Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned, or his video might be up already over there. So be sure to check that out. All right, thanks, guys, and we will see you next time.